So good afternoon, everyone, and a very warm welcome to this opening of the Together for Transparency initiative. My name is Veronica Colerio. I'm from the UNFCCC Secretariat, working in the Transparency Division, and it's a pleasure being here with you. As you know, as we gather here in Belém, we mark an important milestone, 10 years since the Paris Agreement. And transparency has been one of the defining pillars of this journey. And transparency not only builds trust, but ensures accountability and allows us to see our collective progress towards our global climate goals. Today, we celebrate our achievements in all these 10 years, but as well, we are looking ahead and what is the future for transparency as well. With that, I would like to give the floor, and it's my pleasure to invite Mr. Daniele Violetti. He's the Senior Director at the UNFCCC Secretariat to deliver his opening remarks.
Thank you, Veronica. Good afternoon to all of you. Really a pleasure to be here and welcoming you to the high-level opening of Together for Transparency here at COP30. And really is a special occasion that offers us the opportunity to reflect, yes, on the 10 years since the Paris Agreement, but also to the progress made in the transparency regime. So it's more than a milestone. It's yes, a celebration of how far we have come together, but also how the enhanced transparency framework was born out of the vision in Paris, and today it is the key to our collective climate change efforts. If we look back, the ETF has evolved from an ambitious idea into a functioning system, confirmed that as of now 118 parties have submitted their first biennial transparency reports, which is quite remarkable if we consider the short time that was in this process for this. And 44 countries have completed their technical expert reviews weeks, identifying hundreds of areas for improvement and capacity building needs. And the second session of the facilitative multilateral consideration of progress will be held later this week here in Belém at COP30. So these are not just numbers of achievement of the ETF process, but they really present evidence-based policy making in action. The ETF has enabled parties to collect and share climate data, refine nationally determined contribution, track emissions, identify reduction opportunities, attract investment, and plan transition that are credible, just, and achievable. This progress has required political leadership, technical expertise, and sustained support, especially for developing country parties. Let me talk about the work of the consultative group of experts and other support providers, which has demonstrated to be indispensable in helping countries access resources, build capacity, develop systems, and share knowledge. As we are here and celebrating these achievements, we have to look ahead as well. The ETF will remain central to strengthening ambition, building confidence, and enhancing climate action. Digital tools and innovations such as the Climate Data Hub are driving efficiency and institutional learning, but resource mobilization remains critical to build the capacity. And we must ensure that every country can participate fully in the ETF with predictable, timely, and sufficient financial and technical support so no party is left behind. Transparency is the foundation of trust ambition and accountability, and the information collected under the ETF will underpin the second global stocktake outcomes and help us identify where we stand and where we must go next. So it's really an opportunity to seize the moment, not only to celebrate, but also to renew our commitment to make transparency universal and continuous, to ensure parties have all the tools and support they need, and the use of the ETF as a driver of more ambitious and evidence-based climate action. Let me go to close with thanking our distinguished panelists for the time of being with us today during a very busy period, and of course we look forward to your insights and input to the discussion, and as well the COP29 and COP30 presidency that have played a critical leadership role in our ETF journey. They will convene a ministerial high-level dialogue on transparency, which will take place on Thursday in the special event room Madeira from 9 to 12. And of course, I will conclude by congratulating all parties for bringing the Paris Agreement Transparency Framework fully to life. Together, through the Together4Transparency initiative, we reaffirm that all actors, governments, experts, and stakeholders play a vital role in ensuring the success of the Paris Agreement, and let us continue to build trust, drive accountability, and inspire the world to a greater climate ambition. Thank you very much, and I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniele, for your thoughtful words and also for reminding us why transparency is at the heart of the Paris Agreement. And with that, I'm now honored to hear from someone who represents the next generation of climate leadership. And please join me in welcoming Mrs. Marcele Oliveira, the COP30 Presidency Youth Climate Champion, to deliver a keynote address.
Hello everyone, good afternoon. To be transparent, in this time in the afternoon, I'm so tired, and I know you are too. So I want to start maybe inviting you to wake up quickly. 1 minute, wake up with me, please, stand up. And we can maybe together think about the important thing we are doing here when we talk about the Paris Agreement. I was there because I had 26, but I understand maybe it was a room like this. Okay, was like this, and a lot of data, science, and ambitions in trying to make one possible space to advance in climate justice and multilateralism cooperation between the countries. So when I look for you and also look for this specific room, when yesterday we made one session with a party, youth in party delegates, so this room were fully of young people yesterday at this same time. I understand we are doing the right thing, but maybe not in the fastly way we need to protect and save their lives. But we are doing, and we stay here, and this is one reason to celebrate. So I want to invite you to look each other, because that's one thing sometimes we didn't do. And look at each other, maybe take a hug and say thank you for coming, and thank you for stay doing that for hours. Exactly. This is a thank you, a smile. You can just say hi, hello, thank you, yes. And that's the reason also to say welcome Brazil, welcome the way we understand the things. And now we can sit again, because I will just highlight some points. But it's good starting that way, right? I think it's important. Maybe if the negotiations start in that way too, the things was more exciting and with more ambitious in the final of the decisions. The successes of the Paris Agreement depends of this thing we call mutirão, and now I think you know is collective effort. Every actor, government, business, civil society, and also young people have one role to play in this perception about the ambition and the transition for the planet we want. The Enhanced Transparency Framework is a technical process, but also is a foundation of trust. And for me, being here now is like this continuous effort coming for different persons from different countries, looking each other and don't letting the things just be in that way. We have the hope to make the change coming because we are doing our best for that. And that's the reason we are in the PICC role supporting the action agenda and supporting this mutirão coming for the COP30 presidency, understanding we need everybody, and also it's important we build process to everybody participate, like this room, but also like the social media contents we made, like the manifestations, like the spaces we have to study, or the space we have for intergenerational connection. It's not one thing or another thing, it's everything together and at the same time. It's important we understand youth are both beneficiaries and drivers of the transparency, because access the information empower us to understand the process. And for me, it was important to understand this convention, the climate convention, born in my city, in Rio de Janeiro. In one moment, I was not born yet, but a lot of persons around me, like my parents and people living in the same street I live in, they saw this Echo 92 happen, and now they are looking for this COP30 and trying to understand we are in the same place, in the same role, not in advance. And my responsibility is to say to them, yes, we are advancing. We are advancing because, one, we are creative. Two, we stay in collaboration. But three, if we was not advancing, if the Paris Agreement don't have any success, probably we was not here now. So if we are here, it's because we have successfully, we have one responsible being coming, and we have important information to share between us, and this information shared between us is the reason of the transparency is important. So the transparency is a shared responsibility too, because we need the conversation don't be just in the closed doors, but is also in the mobilization roles for everybody and understanding the disproportionality of the impacts of climate change. But when each other contributes to building trust through data and dialogue, we move closer to a system when accountability is not a burden, but a driver of progress, equity, and collective success. So this collective success is the reason we say is mutirão. Mutirão is this word without translation specifically, but it's about collective action. My first mutirão was when my mother says to me, I have the responsibility to clean the church with my friends in one Saturday in the morning. And that was my responsibility for many months in my life when I was a children. And she said to me, you don't go because you have the responsibility with that. And if you have the responsibility, you are in one position to talk and be listened. This is not one thing you can do. So I think we are not, because we understand the responsibility and we are in the PICC role. And I also say we because we are a team of youth champions from Brazil for the different biomes, walking and running between this conference and also mobilizing people all to sign the conference about climate education, and now also about the transparency and about this moment we will start now with the Together for Transparency high-level event. So thank you to invite me to share a little bit about my history and to share a little bit about the hope we have for this COP, the COP of implementation, the COP of action, also the COP of trust. So if the COP of trust have everything connected with the transparency, we hope like young people, the best decisions, the decisions inside the negotiations, but also the intergenerational collaboration between the people inside the ECO 92 convention and the COP30 convention, because this is the most important conference about climate justice in my generation. So it's important for us because we are person living in the present and looking for the future, but also it's important for us because we'll be in the books of history, and I want to be there like one person, make the history like all you was inside this agreement, the Paris Agreement, and there are no disagreements we made between the years. So count with us, because we count with all you too, and good session for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcele. That was really inspiring, and I think your words made us hopeful for the future. So that's really nice. And now I think we will move to the next part of our event, which is an interactive dialogue. So I would like to thank the keynote speakers of this event for taking the time. I know this is a busy time and showing the importance of transparency. Thank you. So I'll invite the panelists to come to the podium. So I would like to introduce, I'm delighted to hand over now to our moderator, Mr. Nathan Coxwell. He's a senior associate at the World Resource Institute, and he will guide us in today's discussion. Thank you, Nathan.
Thank you, Veronica, and thank you, Daniele and Marcele, for the wonderful opening. I am always delighted to join conversations around transparency and be with my transparency friends. So I'm very much looking forward to this conversation. I think we're here today to celebrate the 10 years since Paris, to celebrate the advances parties and others have made in advancing and enhancing transparency. In those past 10 years, parties have developed the MPGs for the Enhanced Transparency Framework, have developed the common tabular formats, common reporting tables, done a lot of very technical work. The Secretariat has developed reporting tools, and parties, as Daniele mentioned, 118 have submitted their first BTRs. And so I hope the conversation over the next 35 minutes or so will celebrate all of those achievements and also look forward to the next decade and what comes next. So let me introduce the panelists, and then we'll dive right into a couple of questions. I'll start at the end. First, Manuel Pulgar Vidal, who is the global lead for climate and energy at WWF and former Minister of Environment in Peru and the COP20 president. So glad to have you. Kaveh Gillimpur, who's the Vice President for International Strategies at C2ES and former Chief Negotiator for Climate Change in the UK. We have Ruth Zugman Dukoto, who's Deputy Director of the Climate Change Division at UNEP. We have Frederick Uma, who's Project Manager, Ministry of Environment, Kenya, and the Climate Change Directorate, and a member of the consultative group of experts. And we have Uti Honkatokia, who's Director of Climate and Chemicals Unit, Chief Negotiator for Climate Change at the Ministry of Environment, Finland. So welcome you all, and glad to have you join this conversation. I'm going to start with you, Manuel. Just a question, sort of thinking back to COP20, the state of conversations around transparency 11 years ago in Lima. You know, I think a lot has changed since then, obviously, with Paris, but would just be really keen to hear your reflections on the evolution of conversations around transparency since COP20, and also given your current role, how do you see the role of non-party stakeholders unfolding in the transparency process?
Sure, thank you. Thank you very much for this opportunity. So, to put Lima COP20 in context, it's always important to put it in context. So, in my point of view, transparency and reporting has always been very instrumental to progress in our climate objective. That is something important to be recognized. And if we were to recognize phases on how much transparency and reporting has been that as instrumental as I am mentioning, we could say from 92 Rio Convention to Cancun, probably used to be the time in which it was mostly the national communications. So important because I think that those communications supported and helped a lot to create more awareness, not only domestically, but even globally. And why I am defining Cancun as the next phase? Because after the failure of Copenhagen, we started a new and fully different process. Because probably we recognize that part of the failure, it was that the time had changed to continue thinking on a top-down process, and we started a bottom-up. And actually, that started with the Copenhagen Accord, that non-formal accord of 5 countries, no, it was 5 countries that signed it, that it was the seat of the NDCs. So the seat of the NDCs, it was the Copenhagen Accord, and then it was formalized. So from Cancun to Lima, all the discussion, it was how can we rebuild trust as a way to get an agreement based on transparency and reporting. And probably a key milestone in that process from Cancun to Lima, it was Warsaw, because it was the time in which the INDC, it was finally adopted. And correct me if I am wrong, I think it was in Warsaw. And it was in between Warsaw and Lima that the first synthesis report of aggregate effects, it was released just before Lima COP20. So it was a time in which what we were discussing it is how can we get an agreement, how can we create trust within parties to adopt an agreement based in the CBDR-RC principle, because that was the main topic of discussion in relation to the expected Paris Agreement. So in Lima, the Lima Call for the Lima Call for Climate Action, it was focused on that. So the discussion were related to, okay, how much reporting, how much transparent I can be if I don't have the capacities? No, what does it mean for from the developed world, the former Annex 1 and the non-Annex 1 countries? So how to deal with, how much flexibility I do need to continue progressing on this reporting and transparency. That used to be a key element of the process. And now things have already changed. So we can, for now, we can say that 10 years after Paris Agreement, transparency and reporting has been more instrumental, but not yet enough to create the accountability that this process deserves. So for me, accountability, it is a key element that it should be moved because of transparency and reporting. That is a key element. But because we don't have too much time, let me finish with the action agenda. So in some way, by creating the action agenda that you know it was created in Lima under the title of the Lima Paris Action Agenda, that was the beginning of the action agenda, what we were trying, it was to, by bringing non-party stakeholders, so including non-party plus subnational government, what we were trying, it was to promote more participation for implementing, so not only for creating momentum for the adoption of the agreement, but to implement it. And immediately, in some way, we were thinking on how can we create also transparency mechanism and reporting mechanism for the non-state actors. And let me finish with this. Remember that all of this system has been created in a voluntary basis. So that is a key element, because if it is a voluntary basis, we immediately will recognize that by having transparency and reporting, we can create conditions for making through or because the information, this system more accountable. That is key. It is not, it is a non-legally binding agreement and all of those things. And in case of the private sector and the action agenda, I think that it has been so instrumental to support and to help to define the transitions, to define targets. It has mobilized a lot of initiatives to create standards and to see mechanisms to track progress and all of that. We have already gotten all what we had expected, not yet, but I think that we are going in the right direction.
Wonderful, great to hear that trajectory in the right direction. let me turn next to Uti next to me. I think one of the major breakthroughs in Paris was the movement to a common system, the movement to a single report, single MPGs. And so I think that's been incredibly important. But Finland has had a long history of reporting. I looked yesterday, your first national communication was in January 1995. So 30 years of experience and history in reporting. And so I was just hoping you could share with the audience some of that experience, some of the lessons over the last 30 years, or even over the last few as you've developed your first BTR. What are some of those lessons of successes you've learned through the experience?
Okay. Yes, thank you so much, and thank you for the invitation to this panel. I actually wanted to sort of structure my remarks around sort of the top 5 lessons learned. So 5 points. The first one is that make sure that you have well-structured working methods. So what we did, and like was just said, I mean, we have not just 10 years of experience in terms of reporting, but indeed 30 years of experience. So you need to have a good structure for the reporting efforts. There has to be a designated contact person in each of the ministries and government agencies. I mean, this is really a horizontal exercise, so it involves several ministries. So that's really a key to successful reporting. And what we did was organizing the work in working groups, and we found that a very sort of useful method in terms of everyone got the sense of working together for a common worthy goal. I mean, certainly these times, everyone's very busy, you're multitasking. So they need to feel that what they are spending their time on is something worthwhile and useful. These working groups then, they gathered a mix of experts, some experienced, some new. I think you need to have a good mix with very different backgrounds, and also that provided a platform for then sort of passing on that information and also learning from others. The working groups were, for example, on greenhouse gas inventory, on adaptation, on tracking progress, and so on. Some of those working groups were permanent, especially the one on inventories, obviously. Others were sort of ad hoc and just time-bound. The second point is that people need to feel they need to take ownership. So really make sure that there's this sense of ownership. And then also make sure that you don't involve just the ministries, but also the agencies and the different research institutes. I mean, the more you can kind of spread that experience and draw on their knowledge, the better. The third point is that not all knowledge resides in your own country. So we were actually very lucky in terms of being able to draw on the experiences of the other European Union member states, but also I come from Finland, so we also have a network of the Nordic countries, and when it comes to transparency, there's no such thing as a stupid question, and sometimes it's so much easier than to pose those questions when you are there with peers. The fourth point, reviews are extremely important. And the reviews, they may sound scary, but they actually help with the performance. They help you improve over time. And they are sort of like these points when you can always sort of assess as where you are compared to where you thought you were. So there's the aspect of the quality control, quality assessment, and also the annual meetings of sectoral experts. I think we've benefited from all of that. Also very important is this sort of training and capacity building that we get through the UNFCCC Secretariat. So the continuous improvement is something that you aim for. I mean, the world is changing, reporting is changing, circumstances change, and you need to adapt and things evolve. And the final point, fifth point, this is a marathon. It's not a 100-meter sprint. And some of the experts, I think we have indeed one expert who was already involved on the energy side 30 years ago. So there is this kind of institutional knowledge that you build over time, and that's also very important. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing. Yeah. Thank you for those 5 really helpful lessons. Let me turn to Fred next. I mentioned earlier the establishment of the single reporting system, but the way that works is through the provision of flexibility for developing country partners and parties who need it in light of their capacities. And I know yesterday, all day, the mandated event, World Cafe on enhancing support, and I know you've just come from conversations around the CGE, and earlier today, additional conversations around enhancing support for developing countries. So I was just curious if you could speak to your experiences in Kenya in preparing your BTR, in preparing your reporting, but also how the conversations over the last few days have helped or can help drive the momentum and additional experiences and lessons for reporting over the next few years.
Thank you. Is it working? Yes, thanks. No, thank you so much, and thanks for inviting me to be part of this excellent panel with a number of support providers. In terms of our Kenyan experience, thanks Nathan for facilitating this. We decided as a country, and me too as a person, to put the system we'd established on the CMA1 and subsequent decisions test. And as Kenya, I think we've done a test on every aspect of everything we've ever negotiated in the submission of a BTI. And in that process, we've learned very valuable lessons, very valuable ones. The first one that you just asked of is on flexibility provisions. The flexibility provisions, I think, are the most useful provisions in 18 CMA1 for developing countries like Kenya. And that is because most developing countries, even though are reporting, were not reporting consistently as developed countries were. Most of us were using consultants to do that work. So when we started the BTR process, especially developing countries that are to submit their reports by 2024, there was very little to use or structures to leverage. Most of us were creating systems from scratch. And one of the things we realized was that there are certain aspects of or certain data sets that you can't get in 1 year. A case in point is the reporting provision on projections. I realized that we submitted an NDC, but we had not spent a lot of time to understand what we submitted. So when we pulled it up and tried to track it, we realized we didn't have clearly defined policies and measures that are quantified in terms of the abatement potential, which technically meant that we are not able to model projections, even though our NDC target is projection-based. So I put all the experts who participated in that process in one room for 1 week. They couldn't even identify what the indicators were. So we decided we were only going to use one indicator, which is the inventory itself, to be able to for the report. The other flexibility that we are now just exercising now is the review report, the feedback. Secretariat is expecting us to give our feedback. We just realized there is a flexibility provision because we went had time to look at that report. We were preparing for the COP, so I'm in a hurry to draft a letter to tell the Secretariat, wait, we are exercising flexibility. I will give you feedback by January 13th. So those flexibility provisions are very, very useful for developing countries. I think the final point I wanted to make is that we set up a system that cannot be operational if countries are to depend fully on consultants. which definitely means that we have to put in place proper national institutional arrangements and systems to be able to have the data, use that data, but also participate in the review process, because you cannot rehire a consultant who compiled your inventory to respond to the review questions. And therefore, most of us will heavily rely on support providers to be able to effectively get to a point where we can comfortably implement the enhanced transparency framework in a sustainable manner. Thank you.
I find the insight, I think the first words you said, we're going to put the system to test, a really useful and important strategy, and I think goes to Uti's point as well, is it's a marathon and not a sprint, and we'll test it and we'll improve it, and we'll keep improving, and the continuous improvement, of course, being an important principle of the Enhanced Transparency Framework. Let me turn to Ruth now, and I think building on some of the same conversation, UNEP is, of course, a critical partner in providing support and working with country partners. And so I was just curious if you could share some of your experiences or reflections in how you have seen capacities change and grow, and or how your approaches to working with countries and supporting their transparency and reporting efforts has changed over the last decade or so.
Well, first of all, thank you very much. It's a pleasure for me to be here with this wonderful panel with so many insights. And I feel part of the transparency family. So I've been working with transparency for the last 10 years. I used to work with the GEF Climate Change Mitigation Unit in UNEP, and we have been supporting countries. I would like to acknowledge my colleagues here from UNDP and from the GEF. They are key partners in that, together with other implementing agencies. And we have been, together with UNFCCC, thinking very hard how we can do this support in the best possible way to avoid exactly what my colleague from Kenya is saying. Because in the past, it was very patchy to access the resources from the GEF to developing countries. It's a process. You have to submit a concept, you have to get the resources, you have to internalize the resources with the implementing agency, you have to transfer the resources to the country in actually batches of cash that goes to the country. And UNEP, we always want to do it with an executing entity that is a government authority, that is the government that is actually responsible for the reporting to the convention. But even trying to do so, we could only do it in batches. So the national communications, the BURs, and then there was a hiatus, a small space. And I think since the last 2 years, we have changed that with UNFCCC, but also with the Global Environment Facility. We have been able to negotiate a package to a country that goes over 4 years. So 2 years of BTR plus the top-up of the national communication. And why I'm saying that? Because it allows a much more predictable resource to the country to be able to slowly build their capacity and use these resources in the best possible way, because otherwise if you hire someone, you have the project resource. How you do when the project resource is not there anymore? Project resource is not going to be there endlessly, and I think that's exactly what you're alluding to, that slowly with time you have to internalize these into the budget process of the country. But it's a process, and it's a marathon. I really think it's a marathon. It takes a lot of years, and Gonzalo has done a lot of evaluations for us. And it takes a lot of years for a country that has little capacity. It's a developing country that has, 17 MEAs to respond to, 17 reports to comply with, to be able to build the capacity to be able to actually have the systems in place. But there has been a lot of progress. Countries have really internalized, at least the ones that we have been working with, that this is important, not only for the Paris Agreement, not only for the climate negotiations, but internally to understand better where are the emissions coming from, where are the efforts that are needed to be put in to actually address the issues that the country needs to face. Where are the policies that will be more effective? So I think this process has been, and I believe, and I would like to hear from my colleague from Kenya, how useful it is for a country actually to know better, to have data underpinning decision-making on climate action. And I think that transparency is important not only for our process here to discuss and to be able to compare apples and oranges, but for the country to make their decisions and to work together. I have some points here on things that have improved over time, but I think that based on this discussion, I changed a little bit because I think that this is very important to be said. And on top of it, I think the countries also have requested for some time capacity building. You mentioned training and capacity building, and we have been working with UNDP on a global support program to support countries to build their MRV systems, the greenhouse gas inventories, to understand and share with them and hopefully build capacity on the specific sectoral challenges to compile and to get data, the institutional arrangements that need to be agreed with, the different sectoral ministries that have to provide the data, etc., and to provide communities of practice. This global support program supports not only the capacity building initiative for transparency, but also the biennial transparency report system. And we have tried to build a support program that has subnational networks and communities of practice where countries can exchange with each other, same language, same region, same challenges, so they can actually learn. And it's exactly as you were saying, I think, Uchi, that you can ask for help, but we believe that asking for help with the similar challenges is much more effective because sometimes you do have limitations in terms of systems and things like that. What I see that going forward, what are things that we can look forward to is the use of digital systems to support, not necessarily artificial intelligence and to do an overarching kind of looking into the countries, but to facilitate the reporting, not to have to start over again. And I think the new electronic system that UNFCCC put in place, if countries can begin to easily use these and incorporate that, the reporting will become easier and easier as we evolve. So these are some of the things that I wanted to share. Thank you.
Thank you for those insights. And I think one of the messages I take away is the importance of not walking alone and having the community support programs and moving forward together as well. Let me turn to Kaveh now. We've spent a lot of time talking about reporting, and we've mentioned a little bit on the review side, but we've neglected thus far in our conversation to touch on another very critical element of the Enhanced Transparency Framework, and that's the facilitative multilateral consideration of progress. And Bonn earlier this year was a milestone moment in our 10 years of transparency history since Paris with the first FMCP workshop, and the second is just in a few days here in Belém. So I was just curious if you could share some of your thoughts, reflections on the importance of that process, how we as a transparency community, as a Together4Transparency community, can leverage that process to tell the stories of implementation that are happening all over in all countries.
Thank you very much for inviting me. I keep being in panels with Manuel, so he's heard this before. At the time of Paris and before, I was a real skeptic about the action agenda, and I was wrong about that. And when we were negotiating Paris and I was on the negotiating team of the European Union, I was a real skeptic around the transparency, and I was also wrong about that. So I'm not a transparency expert, but I am a transparency convert. And it was... exactly, yeah. The St. Paul's conversion in But I think the reason I wanted to raise that is that everybody in this room is obviously part of the family and believes in the importance, unless somebody is in the room by accident. I think what we need to do is get this message to outside the room. and that frankly it's still a struggle to remind people that the enhanced transparency framework is there and why it's important. And I think it's now at least as important as the whole NDC ambition cycle, because the BTRs tell us what has actually happened, and I think the real measure of progress is the trajectory between what will become successive BTR reports. NDCs are words on paper, the BTRs tell us what's happened. And what we've heard from ministers around the world throughout this year is that COP30 has to show that multilateralism is still alive, but also that the messages coming out of this process has to speak to the priorities and concerns of real people around the world. So what does this have to do with the FMCP? So, I mean, this is an opportunity for countries to actually show what they've been doing and why it's relevant to their people. And NDCs don't really do that. It's about aspirations, which is also important, but it's important to translate all this jargon in these 2 weeks of COP into something that means for people around the world. And I was really struck by the quality of the conversation that happened in Bonn in the FMCP. It was just 3 countries this time, the first time around, but the atmosphere was very constructive and interactive. And I think everybody in that room got a lot out of it. The people presenting all said afterwards that they were really glad that they went through the process. Every head of delegation that I've ever met that's presented on their reports has always said afterwards that the experience was a great one, not before, but afterwards. And I think it's an important place to showcase progress. But also what I found particularly interesting about what happened in Bonn was the informal conversation afterwards. And that was where the parties really had a chance to speak and exchange views. And actually, what was happening in that room was what we were really hoping would happen under the mitigation work program, but hasn't happened. But because the way that the FMCP is set up, with the way that there's the ground rules about how questions can be asked and the way it's conducted, the parties felt very safe, and it created an amazing condition for exchange. I know the Secretariat have an enormous challenge to get through almost 200 of these every 2 years, but I think having a space where you can create that sort of informal exchange is important. So anyway, I think my FMCP is important for so many reasons, but I think the biggest one is to translate what this whole process means for people around the world. And I think it's absolutely critical as a sort of communications tool. But maybe we need to find a better way of calling it than FMCP, because I can't even say the facilitative multilateral. Let's find another word for comms purposes. Yeah.
Thank you, Kaveh, and I have very few creative brain cells, but I will devote them to this question of how do we better market the FMCP. We've got just a couple of minutes left, so I've got one rapid-fire question for all of the panelists. Maybe we'll start at Manuel and then just work our way down the row here. What are your hopes, visions, dreams for the next 10 years, the next decade in transparency? So when we meet again at COP40 in 10 years and we have this conversation again, what are you hoping we're talking about then? So just in a couple of sentences.
My main hope, it is about the economy. So let me say something in 1 minute. I love that you mentioned understanding, Ruth, because transparency has promoted understanding. In the beginning, the understanding used to be more related to our sources of emission, created some awareness domestically, but soon after that we realized that it is not just about emissions. Even I am always saying in the Global South, be careful with that phrase that you are a low emitter, because that is the most non-productive phrase, because now it is not about how high, how low you are emitting. It is about the economy and competitiveness. So I hope that the transparency can show to the world that it is about development, that it is about the economy, that we are transitioning to a different era. No? And that is for me my hope, to have things that can promote that awareness plus accountability.
Thank you. I'm going to give a process answer in a boring way, but I would hope that in 10 years, if I'm still doing this, that journalists are calling me and asking me, what do you think about the BTR synthesis report, rather than what do you think about the NDC synthesis report? And I mean that in seriousness, because that would indicate a real change and maturity of our process to focus on what's being done and not on what's being promised. Because at the moment, journalists are saying, what's a BTR synthesis report? So we need to change that.
Well, I'm happy I'm the third because I agree with both of you. I agree that we need to really aim for countries to see the potential of the green energy transition and the benefits for green jobs, for development, for health. And if we can't get this message right, we won't be here 10 years from now. Because the countries, all of us, we need these to be positive and to be good for people. And that, I think, is the change that we need to have. So I totally agree with you. And I totally agree with you. The BTR are robust reports, science-based reports, correct reports, maybe not perfect reports yet. Go look at the NDCs. I totally agree with you. So that is really important to say. And if we want NDCs to be investable, they have to follow the path of long-term strategies, net zero, real strategies, like the UK has done a very good job in doing that, Costa Rica as well. So, or we have to use the BTRs. And I think that what I would like to see is that us implementing agencies were out of the picture. And countries are so robust into, their embrace and empowerment that they can actually do that. And we will focus on the next emerging issues and help another area, but not transparency.
Thank you. I'm sure. Because, I sit in negotiations, but I also implement what I negotiate, which means my variables are more in terms of how things are evolving. But one thing I'm hopeful and that you UNEP's approach of working directly with government institutions is one of the biggest incentives to force countries to put in place systems that work. Political processes are known for you cannot predict tomorrow easily. But what the transparency arrangement has proven so far is that it is the only place that demonstrates whether we are making sense in this process or we need to disband everything and rethink what we are doing. At least for that purpose alone, it is one place that we need to invest a lot in. I've become very popular because people who want a lot of money from the carbon markets have to come and ask me what the Kenyan carbon budget is. Because without the BTR and the inventory report, then their billions in modeling do not make sense. So the transparency framework is the only place that makes sense for everyone, that always aligns everyone and reminds us that we're either making progress or we're just pursuing climate tourism as we visit every country year in, year out. But I'm very hopeful that as we build systems and as we ensure that the current enhanced transparency framework is implemented sustainably, that we are going to put in place systems in developing countries that are going to be there for posterity, and that over time we won't have to rely on this project approach to compiling reports like the BTR, which is very useful even for national level policy making. Thank you.
Okay, I'm was going to give a very flippant answer in saying that, I'm not asking for the moon, I'm just asking for a new FCCC reporting tool that would finally work. I think that would be a good start, but sort of a more thought through a serious answer. I think we would then have solid transparency arrangements that will show that we are collectively on a really credible, good path to net zero. That would be my vision for the 10 years. Thank you.
Wonderful. Let's give our panel a giant round of applause. And I will just hand back to Veronica for a few closing words.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. It was very nice to hear you, and I think I will continue training with this marathon for quite a long time. I would like to officially launch the Together for Transparency at COP30. We have many trainers for this marathon and many events from our partners, from the UNFCCC, and I hope you can all join us. You will see there that you have all the information and look at our transparency calendar, and I hope to see you there. I thank again on behalf of the UNFCCC Secretariat, not only to the panelists, but to all the transparency community. And to finish this beautiful event, I think, as we would like to work together for transparency, I would like all of you to come. We will try to have like a full family picture. I would ask the UNFCCC photographer if he can stay for that. And please come to us and let's have a full picture and see you around in all these transparency events. And let's keep on working together for transparency. Thank you.